What I'm going to do today is to go over a document that's not original to me. It was actually put together and published by Robert Sternberg, which is a name that many of you may have encountered or may know. Famous for intelligence testing, a triangular theory of love, and two or three other things over the years. He spent most of his career at Yale, where he was a faculty member and then eventually department head. He's currently provost at Oklahoma State, so follow the money. At any rate, Sternberg a number of years ago was asked to give advice to graduate students, young faculty members on professional writing, on how to be successful in professional writing, and he came up with this outline of kind of 21 points. Some of these we may spend a moment or two talking about, some of them I'll just sort of mention and go on, but I'm happy to borrow from his wisdom. One that I'm going to add, so we'll make this point 0 if you want 21 points, is not covered by Sternberg, given sort of his agenda and his purpose. But I think we need to start here, which is why write? Okay? All of you are graduate students in the department in psychology or counseling, and as a fact of being a graduate student in that program, you're on a trajectory, most of you, to either be in academia or to be in some kind of an applied professional practice, be it consulting or counseling. If you are going to academia, the why write question is very straightforward. You've all heard the axiom, publish or perish, and it's absolutely true. If you want to keep your job, if you want to get raises, you're going to have to, at a reasonable pace and rate, produce peer-reviewed publications. If you are not someone who aspires to go to academia, then you may be saying, well, why should I write? Let me sort of just pitch this mostly toward counseling. If not you, who? Right? Here you are getting a graduate level degree in your academic discipline. You are going to be vested as one of the most well-educated professionals in that area. If you're not going to be adding to the literature, well, who would be? Okay? I know counseling puts a lot of emphasis on service, on giving back to the community, and in this case you are part of a professional community and you owe them the service. So even if you're thinking, oh, all I want to do is to work with kids in schools or whatever the case might be, in virtue of your education and experiences, you are in fact the person who should be embracing this task. You should think about writing. Alright, so having talked about why write, let's run through Sternberg's list of some tips for being successful at writing. His first point is to start strong. And he makes a point, and this is true, it's based on a lot of research. He, matter of fact, gives some citations, and I'm aware of some that he doesn't cite, that the majority of people will simply scan titles, okay? And if your title sort of interests them, they might read the abstract. But 85% of the people who claim to have read an article have in fact read less than the one paragraph. Okay? So when he says start strong, what he's trying to say, and it's absolutely true, that if you don't do something in that opening paragraph, the title and the abstract, to grab the reader, then odds are you've lost the reader. Okay? So there's your real concrete tip. That between title, abstract, and the first paragraph, you need to sort of drop your A-bomb, as it were. All right? Second thing is to tell readers why they should be interested. This piggybacks onto the first one to some degree, although there's a number of number of ways you can potentially start strong. But what he's really just trying to say here, and what I think is good advice, is you need to show people sort of your hand early on. Don't be coy. This isn't a mystery novel. If it is something that they're interested in, I mean, those are the people that are going to be reading your article anyway. You need to kind of, you know, invite them. You need to make it very clear what it is you have to offer. A third point is that make sure your article does what it says it will do. Okay? And this also piggybacks onto the first two. While you do want to start strong and you want to, you know, invite your readers to sort of your space here, you want to be honest and authentic. Okay? You don't want to be misleading. Again, you don't want to be coy, but you don't want to set your paper up as if it's going to be about one thing and then not be able to deliver on that. All right? I think that as a reviewer, which I have done quite a bit of as well, again, I do sometimes see this as a problem, and it's a fatal problem if I'm reviewing a paper, where, you know, based upon the first couple of pages, you really think it's going to sort of be about X. By the time you get to the method and you see the results, you're pretty disappointed that it sort of looked like it was going to be something good, but it sort of gets weaker and weaker and weaker as the details are revealed. The fourth point, make sure that the literature review is focused, reasonably complete, and balanced. Well, focused hopefully makes good sense. You want the literature review to be as sleek and as compact as it can be. That's part of what focus means. Unless you're writing a review paper, you know, want to keep this as succinct as possible. Having just said you want it as succinct as possible, it does still need to be reasonably complete. You need to cite all the relevant literature that someone would need to know to make sense of your article, as well as to show how it situates with respect to that topic and what's already been published on that topic. The last part, balanced, maybe a little more interesting, maybe even a little more tricky. Certainly if you are writing in an area where there is a mix of opinion, you at least want to acknowledge that. Again, a problem you sometimes see as you're a reviewer, if you are reviewing a paper in an area where there are competing theories or where there are, you know, some controversy, is this paper clearly staking out a position on one side of this controversy? Well, that's okay, but are they staking out that position on one side of the controversy in a way that's respectful of the entire question, or are they just so kind of biased and agenda-oriented that they're just sort of ignoring the whole other half of this? It didn't get to be a controversy in the literature if you could just dismiss the whole other half of it. Okay? Point number 5. Always explain what your results mean. Again, maybe this sounds really obvious, but as he points out in there, and I don't know that I've seen this too much as a reviewer, but gosh, I've seen it a whole lot teaching experimental. I'll read an entire methods and results section and have no idea what the question was. I suppose you could see that as a reviewer. I guess I've been fortunate. But you want to make it real clear not only what question you're asking, but how the methods and results answer that question. So you don't want to leave it vague or fill in the blanks or, to be inferred. You want to be real concrete about what the question was, what you did to answer the question, and what that answer was. Number 6, be sure to consider alternative interpretations of the data. Well, we touched on this just a moment ago when we talked about balance. This one's a little bit tricky in the sense that there's probably always alternative ways to have analyzed your data, alternative ways to interpret the data analysis that you've done. So I guess I would say you need to, again, be fair and balanced. You don't need to sort of lay awake at night coming up with a hypothetical alternative explanation. I mean, in some cases, it's real straightforward what this means, okay? in which case you don't need to, like I said, become a contortionist to say, well, but it could, mean this other thing. But if it's not straightforward, if it's not straightforward, it's going to be real obvious to the reviewer, okay? And then if you've only presented sort of one explanation, then you're going to again look like you have not done a thorough job, you've not been fair and balanced. He divides this into some sections. The last one in the first section is in strongly stated clear take-home message. Again, teaching a class like experimental design where you have people actually do some writing, one of the things that is sometimes used as an exercise in there are what are called these executive summaries, and I have heard them described this way. Imagine that you were stuck in the elevator with somebody important and relevant, president of the university, your department head, your major advisor's major advisor, somebody big in your area at a conference or whatever, and since you're stuck there in the elevator with them for a few minutes, right in the top floor or whatever, they say, tell me about your research. So you've got 15 seconds, something like that, and how can you in 15 seconds sort of say something that's kind of impactful and something that's even memorable, right? I mean, that's what you want to have, is then walk out of there and say, maybe I should read that, maybe I should look that up. I remember that guy's name, and that was an interesting factoid. Well, all that's a little bit of a tangent, but by way of saying I think that's what Sternberg is talking about here, is that when you're done with the paper, or at the end of the paper, there should be a very clear, precise message that's impactful, that's memorable, that's a kind of a take-home point. So when he says end strong and be and have a clear take-home message, I think that's worth underscoring. All right, in the second section, he focused a little bit on writing per se. So point number 8 is write sentences that are readable, clear, and concise. Well, that's probably always good advice, but again, maybe we can make that even a little more specific here. I'll tell you 2 real concrete things. Never write a sentence longer than 16 words. Okay? Never use the same adjective in a paragraph. Certainly never in a sentence. All right? Those are just good stylistic points that will help make your writing clear, again, easy to follow, straightforward. Some people are better writers than others, all right? But, this is a written medium, and so good writing does matter. Emphasize logical flow and organization. He's going to continue to talk about this a little bit, but it's incredibly important. Again, in teaching a class like experimental, one of the metaphors, and I even use his book in experimental, one of the metaphors he offers in his own book is to think of an article much like a set of directions. Okay, you're starting at one point, you need to get to this other point. That's a really good metaphor for underscoring the importance of organization and logic. In the same way that there's clearly a proper order to give someone driving instructions, right? You do it very much in a linear sequence. There's clearly an optimal and proper way to lay out the flow of your argument in your paper. Explain what you're going to say it, and then restate it. This goes back to the 1800s in northern Germany. Famous people in what we would now call pedagogy stumbled across this notion. People near and dear to psychology endorsed it as well. You've probably heard it as, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. Well, he's saying exactly the same thing. So again, somewhere early on in the introduction, you need to make it real clear what this paper is going to be about. Much of the paper is going to be the telling them, and at the end of the paper, you need to make it real clear what this paper was about. So redundancy in education genuinely sometimes is good. Really, redundancy in education sometimes is good. Give concrete examples, okay? I can't stress this one enough. And again, as seemingly obvious and straightforward as it is, he talks at some length in here about how, many people sort of think to themselves, well, I'm writing about something that's kind of abstract, or I'm writing about something that's not really tangible, maybe it's intelligence or something of that sake, but you can almost always try to explain things by use of an analogy or a metaphor. And the more lived, the more concrete, the more experience near those can be, it just makes for easier reading. Okay? It's just that simple. This is not about being academically sophisticated. This is about being a good communicator. Don't assume that people will know what you mean or be familiar with abbreviations and jargon. I want to focus on the last part of this. I guess it's a little bit of a personal pet peeve of mine, but he's saying exactly the same thing. Abbreviations should only be used if you are constantly referring to a concept that has a common acronym in the literature and that is fairly lengthy to write out. So if you're doing work in theory of mind, you want to make it real clear in the first instance or two, that you're going to abbreviate that as TOM, and that would be okay. But if possible, if you're only going to mention it 2 more times in the entire paper, don't abbreviate it. Just write it out, right? If it's going to be mentioned 28 more times in the paper and it's, theory of mind and it can be shortened to 3 letters, that's okay, all right? But, don't become an abbreviation junkie. And a lot of papers do that, and it's not user-friendly. Likewise with jargon, you want to avoid it like the plague. There may be ways that you talk with your advisor, with your peers, that you may even think are more widespread than they are, but they may be in fact local to your lab or local to a smaller research community that maybe spans a couple of labs. So you want to be real careful that you are using always language that maximizes clarity for the uninitiated. So avoid abbreviations, avoid jargon. The next one I think is really, really, really important. And again, he talks about it at some length in here. And he says his little phrase for number 13 is right to be interesting. But what he says, and again I really want to underscore and stress, just because this is technical writing doesn't mean it has to be dull or bad. Okay? Those two things are not causally linked together. Sternberg got to be Sternberg in part because he is a fairly lively and quick and engaging writer. Freud got to be Freud in no small part because he's an extremely engaging writer. Okay? Sternberg says, in its advice it's given a lot, you're well educated, you've read a lot of fiction, you've read a lot of good writing, emulate good writing. You are telling a story here. It's, again, obviously, not an episode of Breaking Bad, but you are still telling a story, right? You're telling a story about why this is significant and interesting, what it is you did to explore it, what the outcome of that was, and how that's changed and modified things, okay? So don't lose sight of the fact that you are, to some degree, still engaged in a narrative exercise here, and that you certainly can be creative and stylistic. There is a professional voice, that's true. These should not read like Pulp Fiction, nor should they read like a letter from, to your grandmother from summer camp. There is a professional voice, but within that professional voice, there's still a whole lot of license to actually write with some dexterity. Number 14, this is another really good one. Write for a broader and technically less skilled audience than you actually expect will read the paper. No matter how few people are interested in your esoteric research topic, And, you know, no matter how sophisticated it actually is or how complex, you still, while you're not writing for third graders, you still really want to try to write to the lowest common denominator, okay? You don't want to, I mean, again, just as he said it, you know, think about how you would tell this to other people in your lab or your major professor, and then simplify it at least one notch, okay? If you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, you're oftentimes in that situation where the other committee members may not really be experts in that domain. They're well educated, you know, they ought to be able to make sense of what you've done here, but again, you don't need, but they're not sort of neck deep in the literature the way maybe you and your advisor are, okay?
Do we have to define each and every word that we use?
No, but again, that gets all the way back to some of the stuff in the lit review part. You need to make an educated guess about, you know, what your readership is. And I think that his notion is once you've made that educated guess, now dial it back one more level. You know, I think people will know this, and this, but these are the least common of those, so let's, go ahead and define those. Number 15, avoid autobiography. Well, there's a couple of ways to interpret this, or a couple of senses that he means here. One is of all the kind of writing styles, I mean, these really shouldn't read like a first-person narrative of how I spent, again, my summer doing this research project, right? That's not really the writing style we're looking to emulate here. Some people will take this so far as to say that there are words that should absolutely never appear in professional literature. Some people would take that one step farther and say words like "I" should never appear in professional writing. I think that varies by situation. I tend to avoid using first-person voice and I, but there are occasionally situations in which it is just what's appropriate, what's called for. So I don't wear that as just an absolute dictum of you can never, write in first-person active voice. But certainly, in general, that's not the voice that most technical professional writing is done in. It's also the case when you say avoid autobiography, even in professional technical writing, there's a tone. Most of the time, it's very neutral in these papers, as it should be. But you occasionally can find a paper that reads a little edgy, a little condescending, And I think part of what he's saying here is also that, don't come across, this should not tell us anything about you. You should be the dispassionate observer, the reporter, the chronicler of these events. This shouldn't tell us how brilliant you are, how well run your lab is, or how you're smarter than the other people, in this area. I shouldn't really learn anything about you or any inferences about you from the way this is put together. Number 16, and he's changed again. The last of these are more concrete suggestions toward publication. Number 16 is simply proofread. And again, this is painfully obvious, but I'll tell you two stories that are not super amusing or anything, but they're absolutely true. I'm a pretty good writer and a big believer. I had a major professor once who made the comment that there are no good writers, but there's some good rewriters. Okay, and I'm a big believer in that. I do lots and lots and lots of revisions, and so I proofread again and again and again. I once had a manuscript that I'm sure I probably, from the time it was done, I'm not talking about working on it, had gone through probably at least 24 times. No exaggeration at all. And literally, as I was putting it in the envelope, I realized that the first sentence was missing a word. You know, and so going all the way back to the beginning, I mean, how many times did I read it? 200 times or something? But of course, I knew what I wanted to say, right? And so, I mean, that's exactly the problem. I'm in forest for trees. I knew what I wanted to say in the first sentence, and it was just, you know, just literally it's sitting there that I realized, like, the verb's not in that sentence, you know. Here's another one. And this doesn't speak well for me or proofreaders at journals. I have one publication, I probably have more than one, but I have at least one publication that I know has, again, a completely fixable, easy to have edited typographical mistake. It's actually in the final publication, it was in the manuscript. You know, it's referring to a table, and it refers to the wrong table. I mean, it's obvious if you're reading it which table it means, but it's got the number wrong. It seemed like I was trying to refer to table 3, and I said table 2 or something like that. And again, I'm sure at some point it had been that table, and I just made some mistake, but even the journal editors didn't catch it. So, proofreading is something you can never do too much of, something that you don't just sort of do once. I'm a binge writer, which helps me a little bit in this sense. And many times, though, you get really excited and you're done with it, and so you're eager to send it out. But if you possibly can, here's you another concrete bit of advice related to proofreading. When you're 100% sure you're done with it, set it aside and come back to it a week later. Okay? And I guarantee you, if you are a good proofreader, you will make at least a handful of more word changes or other places. It's like, I really need to still tweak this. All right? When you're 100% sure you're done with it, set it aside and come back to it a week later. Okay?
Do you read your stuff out loud when you're proofreading?
No, I almost never read out loud. Yeah, I've been read out loud since my son was about 4.
Maybe that's fine too.
The next one, again, real commonsensical. Check journal guidelines for fit. There's 2 senses here, but this is real important. Again, real commonsensical. One is simply fit in terms of, you know, they're going to tell you they want it in a particular style, which, by the way, is not necessarily always current APA style, even for well-known journals in psychology. Some of them just like to be a little idiosyncratic and spell out first names in the references or something like that. So there's the concrete of, you know, am I fitting the instructions that they have provided? And then there's the more abstract sense of fit, maybe even the more important sense of fit. Again, not to be flippant, but you could do this really great, very publishable, really high quality journal on, you know, theory-minded children, and it's not going to publish in, you know, primate studies, right? You know, or it's not going to publish in, you know, gerontology. Again, that is a little flippant, but the point nevertheless obtains. Every journal at every point in time has things that it is interested in. Some of them are sort of the clear mission of the journal. Some of them then also further reflect the current biases of the editor, current interest of the editor. And your best chance of getting good work published promptly is to make sure that you are sending it to a place that would publish it. Okay? We could spend a whole nother talk, so I won't beat this like a dead horse, talking about journal selection. But the 2 senses that he's talking about, one in here is, you know, did you follow the instructions for this journal? And also, you know, are you sending your paper to an appropriate outlet? All right? Maybe next semester we'll talk about journal selection. Number 18, ask a colleague to read your paper as if they were a reviewer. Really, really important. Something that, again, I still always do. I always have at least one colleague read an article before I send it out. I do that for lots and lots of people. When I do it, there's probably two kinds of people in the world. There's those who ask me to do it once and then never ask me to do it again because what they wanted was someone to tell them how good it was. And people who ask me to do it again and again and again and even still mail them to me because I will bend over backwards to nitpick and bleed all over it. Because that's what it needs at that stage. It's getting ready to go to a reviewer who doesn't know you, like you, or care about you, and what it needs right now is the harshest reading, the most draconian assessment that it can be exposed to. So again, when I'm trying to find somebody to read a work for me, I don't want them to tell me, oh, how wonderful it was. I want them to tell me, you know, you left the verb out in the first sentence. No, I'm serious. You know, I want them to look at me like an idiot. The number 19. These last few, again, are more journal-oriented. Take journal reviews seriously, but remember that reviewers are not gods. And then parenthetically, he says, a fact that has escaped some of them. Absolutely, you should take it seriously. When they're doing their job correctly, it is the case that they have identified things that are going to preclude it from being accepted as it is in any credible journal. Okay? And so to the degree that you can say, oh crap, I didn't think about that, then you need to be taking it seriously. But his second point is important as well. You know, I've published a bunch of stuff, and so I've looked at a lot of reviewers. I don't even know that I get the 90%, 80 some odd percent of the changes they suggest I make, okay? But there's a few, hither and yon, and every person who's published a lot of papers will have a story like this, you know, where it's just clear that this person was on drugs or not paying attention or whatever. I mean, you know, because they come up with something that's just, dude, if you'd read the paper, you'd have known that I either did that, or that's why I didn't do that, or whatever the case is. And so his point is just because they say it doesn't make it true. You know, like I said, I probably make 80, 85% of the changes, but I wouldn't even say 90% of the changes. If they are, I mean, you know, 80, 85% is a big number. Most of what I don't make are really sort of just stylistic things, you know, are clearly, another thing reviewers sometimes do, I don't want to get on a tangent, I know we're bound by time here, but it's oftentimes very clear who reviewed your paper because it's like, oh, well, you didn't cite these 4 papers by this author, right? And gee, the first author is the same person in each one. What's the chances that the person is reviewing this? You know, and if I'm not going to send it back to that journal, I probably didn't cite those for a reason, and I'm not going to add them now. So, you know, sometimes it's stylistic, sometimes it's obviously sort of agenda-oriented, and sometimes, like I said, it's just, huh? You know, I mean, what? This is just, it just makes no sense. Number 20, related a little bit to that, but really, really important, don't take reviewers' comments personally. When I first started in academia, I had a couple of people who were in my cohort, if you will. I have a degree in philosophy, my first degree, and there were 2 guys, one of whom went on to actually be a professor in the Ivy League, the other one who, for a while, was a professor at Ohio State. So I'm the black sheep of that family. I'm the poor relation. But they're both out of academia now. And through no small part, it's kind of sort of related to this. And maybe it's worse in philosophy than in psychology, but not by much. It's just as bad in physics or chemistry. But philosophy may be the cruelest, or literature, something like literary criticism, but philosophy's right up there. you just get to the place where you sort of, or they got to the place where they just sort of got tired of constantly being sort of judged and criticized. And it did become personal to them at some point. They just sort of couldn't continue to do that. I can't tell you what kind of person to be now or when you grow up or whatever, but I can just tell you that Sternberg's simple advice here is something you really, really, really got to take seriously. And, not take these personal. I mean, it's not an assessment of your worth as an individual. It's frankly not an assessment of your worth as a scholar, okay? It's not any of those things. I mean, even when these people are doing their job well and doing it right and are sober and paying attention, their charge is to, again, ruthlessly read these things so that the journal that they're working for publishes the highest quality stuff they can. And so it's not personal, right? I mean, their whole job is to nitpick and to find every possible sort of problem. So you do have to be thick-skinned. And there are people in this department. There are people who you've had classes with who have reasonable vitas, but if you were to have a beer with them late enough one night, would tell you that one reason they don't have more on their vita is they can't stand to get a paper rejected. But you just got to go, and again, I can't. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. We're almost done. Matter of fact, we're at number 21. And number 21 is an important one, and it does piggyback on the last one, which is perseverance pays off. One of my major professors when I was getting my PhD in psychology used to always say that he had never written a paper that he had failed to publish. But then he would go on to say that he had never had a paper accepted without revision. Okay? I pretty much can say the same thing, and I internalize that from him. If you have developed, and some of you, whether you know it or not, probably already have developed it, and some of you maybe will never develop it, but most of you, if you do writing, you will develop a sense of what is a publishable question, what is a publishable manuscript. And now that doesn't necessarily say it's going to publish in a 5-star journal or whatever, but you just get the sense of, yes, this deserves to be in the literature. Once you know that, and I'm real comfortable with that assessment, even in my own work, but of other people's work, then it really is just a matter of postage, as it were. And these days you don't really post them anymore. It's almost all electronic submission. But back in my misspent youth, it really is the case that, if you know you've said something that deserves to be in the literature, there are literally more than 10,000 journals indexed in Psych Abstracts. I mean, that's just a fact. More than 10,000. Now, we talked about fit and all that, but for whatever topic you're interested in, there are hundreds of outlets, okay? Be it history, theory of mind, virtual learning, math anxiety, whatever counseling, there are hundreds of journals, okay? So if you're confident that this belongs in the literature and you can not get your feelings hurt by rejection, all right, then absolutely persistence pays off. What I personally do is I maintain an Excel spreadsheet, and the left-hand column is all of my journal articles that are somewhere in process, okay? And I have at least 6, and in some cases maybe 20 entries along the going left to right across the sheet of potential places to send it to. I try to start with the best journal that I think it would belong in, which doesn't mean I begin by sending everything to American Psychology or Psych Bulletin. Again, back to that notion of fit, there's some stuff that are kind of short one-off studies. There's a lot of journals that only do multiple studies kind of thing. I mean, so, but, you know, once you have made some assessment of where it will go, there's, and again, you've got to learn the literature, but there's almost always going to be minimally a half dozen. In some cases, that probably could span out a whole lot more columns than I have it. I just know I'll never get that far. I'll find somebody earlier that will take it. But when I'm first sending it out, I don't just pick a journal. I pick minimally 5 or 6, and in some cases, like I said, maybe 15 or 20, and I spend an afternoon or whatever rank ordering them, enter all that into my spreadsheet, send it out to that first one. If they don't take it, I'll look at the reviews. Like I said, probably 80% of those comments. I'll modify the paper, and then I just, you know, change to strike through on the text and go to the second column on the spreadsheet, and there we have it. Yep.
If you come across a journal who, where they prefer you only give them your manuscript and, you know, I guess forget about everybody else, is that advisable or?
Well, I'm not entirely sure I'm following your question. Journals, like virtually all other publications, you can only have it in review at one place at a time.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm not sending it to all 20 of these at once.
Oh, you
I
don't
just,
do it.
I just, no, not simultaneous submissions. But I do my research on that article and where I want to get it published all at once. Again, people come up with all these, and this gets again back into why some people sort of don't ultimately make it, or why they give up on academia. People come up with all kinds of reasons not to be efficient writers. I mean, they do. And, you know, one reason that I occasionally see people is well, I sent it to this one place, now I've got to go back and look at the literature and figure out where to send it again. No, you do that one time, right? You spend an afternoon, you do an exhaustive analysis of the literature, you know, within the resources that you have. You find at least 5 or 6 potential places, maybe 3, 4, 5 times that. You do it one time. And then you don't have an excuse to, oh, I still have to do this before I make the revisions. It's right there in your spreadsheet. They didn't take it. Here are my reviews. This one, this one's silly. All the rest of this, I'm going to type these changes in. You know, and I'm bad about this too. I mean, when I said I was a binge writer, I wasn't trying to be funny. I'm actually being serious. You know, I'll wind up accumulating several revise and resubmits, and then something like over Thanksgiving weekend or something, I'll knock them all out. You know, probably that's not a good writing strategy. Again, everybody has to develop their own writing strategy, but I'll guarantee you that you could walk from office to office in here, and people basically fall into 2 camps. There's those that the day they get revisions back, within 48 hours, they're going to have sent them back out someplace. Or then people for whom they sit there as if they're, you know, plague victims or something. You know, they just keep looking at that envelope that has that rejection of reviews, and they can't bring themselves to re-engage it. I'm not really in either camp. Like I said, the next time I'm going to have a binge write, I will knock them out. Yeah.
For each manuscript, if it doesn't get accepted at the first one, do you like alter it to fit the I mean, you talked about fit earlier. Do you often have to change it to fit each?
Yes and no. It is a great question. Maybe yes, a little more than no. Again, I have tried to find a variety of journals that I think it will go to, and in many cases, it would not require any change across them, okay? In other words, if I were to send it to this one, or this one. In some cases it does. Again, going all the way back to, you know, a matter of fact, the worst possible thing. And so sometimes I'll even get ready to send it out and realize, crap, these people use Chicago style. It's like, what's the third one on the list over here? Because like, I just don't want to go and redo all the references. I'm in a mood to send this out today. You know, and I've done that, you know. So, you know, you do still need to do a reality check. I mean, is it to fit? But yeah, I mean, there are sometimes journals, and I've got a couple of things like that right now, you know. A journal that maybe is really focused Dr. Ball and Terry Zierfoss and I have a paper that needs to be back out and review. And the first place we sent it, they had published a paper of ours before with a different third author. And I played very heavily on that first paper because I kind of thought since they published the first paper, this is sort of a follow-up study, they'll take it too, but they didn't. And so now when I go to send it someplace else, I probably do need to suck some of that out of there and spin it a little differently. And I had, I had sort of played that up a little more just because it was in their journal. So I even sort of thought that a smart editor, would have bitten on that, I would have thought, because they sort of get credit for how many times they're cited, even if they're cited within something else in their own journal. But
Well, do you play to your audience in terms of if it's an article that could be it could be relevant in a couple of different
oh, absolutely.
fields?
Yeah.
You change it to say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, which again is sort of what I was trying to say there. I guess what I'm saying is I try to pick, when I'm picking my journals, things that won't make me have to make substantive changes if I can avoid it. But I certainly have done that, and this paper is an example of that, where it really does now need, a little more overhaul than just looking at the reviewer's comments, because I was a little idiosyncratic for the first place I sent it. Some of that needs to go out.
Do you think some of your habits, like what you're talking about with how you set up your Excel sheet and things like that, came from your advisor? Or is it something you learned? Because I know Stephen, we've sent something out before and it got rejected, and then we sent it to another journal and we got it accepted, but he kind of had that system.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked it. Granted, he did the rewrite when we sent it out the second time, but we talked about, I think, 3 journals before.
Oh, I don't think what I'm doing is entirely novel, but I did not directly get it from my major advisor.
It's novel, like new to us. Here
Sure.
you talk about it.
But I wouldn't be surprised if, many people in the department and certainly a lot of other people in academia maintained a similar kind of spreadsheet. I just always, from the time I was a kid, one of my personal perversions is I'm a list maker. And so, literally, since the time I was a kid, I think it's one reason I enjoyed collecting baseball cards and stuff, is, you can list out, how many people were on this team or whatever. So now I fell into doing that, but it's just, it's just good housekeeping. Look, here's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid, like I said, spinning your wheels. There's no reason in the world why you send it to one place and it comes back and then you've created for yourself an excuse of, oh, well, now I have to go look at the literature again, I got to go find a fit. No, you do it one time, and then if you've done it well one time, you capture all that information, right, in one setting. So it's just a matter of an efficiency.
So we know that there's words that you straight up don't want to use in publications, like you don't want to say proven as hope.
Never use the word hope.
Are there any other words or phrases that reviewers just can't stand seeing?
There probably are, but again, some of that's going to just be idiosyncratic. Lots of reviewers are big APA. Reviewers come in two groups. Good reviewers come in 2 groups. There are people who, again, just do this because they've been asked or giving back. Maybe they published a couple articles in that journal and they sort of feel a debt or whatever. I would put myself in that group, and I try to do good by those folks. There are other people who just really love to do this, and so they'll in fact sort of network and they volunteer and they review for 15 different journals. Oftentimes these are maybe people at the end of their careers, maybe people who themselves have not been that well published, but this somehow still validates them in the literature or something. I had a colleague like that at Mississippi State. He reviewed for a lot of big-name journals, but he was near the end of his career, and he wasn't currently active researcher, but he felt that sort of kept him in the active research mix. I think it was all egomaniacal, but that's neither here nor there. But in this second group of people, a lot of those people were real APA mavens, okay? And so they sort of love to gotcha on APA style stuff. And a lot of, back to just words, probably the biggest gotcha word is a that which mistake. So you should learn how to use the words that and which appropriately in the English language. And I will tell you that basically any sentence you say out loud that which doesn't sound like it has to be the word in that sentence, it's not. It should be that. Okay? That's just a silly heuristic. I mean, you can go actually read the actual English language rules for when you say that and when you say which. There's a lot of other things, you know, what is it? Comprise. I mean, there's all these kind of words that we systematically misuse in English. That, matter of fact, the APA manual has a list of these common mistakes. You know, the United States is comprised. Is comprised of 50 states or comprises 50 states? And I don't even remember which is correct now, but people almost always use it wrongly. So a lot of reviewers sort of live to find that kind of stuff, especially that which.
We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Are there any questions from Mesquite?
Hi, Mesquite.
They probably are muted. No? Oh.
I don't think there were too much. I did have one question. Something that was a little unclear to me was about, you were talking about showing that you're being passionate about what you're writing about, but also making sure you don't make it personal. So how do you about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think you do have to be passionate to simply be productive. I mean, writing is hard. I mean, even if you're good at it, even if you do it a lot, I mean, outside of academia, I pretty much spend all my free time writing one thing or another. I mean, I've written 3 cookbooks, I'm working on game rules. I mean, I spend all my time writing, but writing is hard. So there has to be a passion for the subject matter and for the writing, but you want to be careful that you do maintain an appropriate voice. I mean, you know, at the end of getting significant results, you don't want to write woo-hoo with an exclamation mark, right? I mean, you know, that's sort of the only point that I'm trying to make, is that you should adopt an appropriate professional voice that, you know, represents this material consistent with the way, you know, you're taught to do in APA style, so that you are reporting it as kind of a dispassionate observer. You're not rooting for the mice in Group A to win. That's the point. So, yes, you do absolutely have to be passionate, but you need to come across with a professional voice that masks, you know, your personal stake in these empirical findings. Does that make sense? What else? Okay. Anything else?
We're good. Well, thank you very much.